Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar. I'm joined today by Elad of Practical Agile Israel, and he is going to be talking to you today about scaling Agile with large-scale Scrum. If you have any questions for Elad, please type them into the questions field on your control panel there, and at the very end of the webinar we will go through your questions one by one. And just make sure you type them at any point during the course of this webinar. You don't necessarily have to wait till the very end. So let me now hand you over to today's presenter, Elad.
Hello, everybody, and good afternoon, at least in Israel. My name is Elad Sofer, and I will be talking to you about large-scale Scrum, or LeSS, as we refer to it. So first of all, just a heads up, if you want to talk to me or have a conversation afterwards or have any questions in the future, just follow me on Twitter. That's my Twitter ID down there. Great. So a little bit about me. I'm a father of two often very awesome boys. I live in Israel. I'm in software development and other roles for 20 years or so. During the last 7 years, I've been doing mostly Agile coaching as my main role. And I am, for the past year and a half, am part of the LeSS organization, which is the major topic of this webinar. So I'm a certified LeSS trainer, one of the chosen few. So let's start talking about large-scale Scrum, which is the topic for this webinar. And often I get people asking me, you say, okay, you're a quote-unquote expert on large-scale Scrum or scaling Agile, so how can I apply Agile in my big and complex organization, is a question I often get asked. And some approaches nowadays will try to answer this question. The basic stand of the LeSS framework, which I'm going to briefly describe, is that this is in fact the wrong question to ask. The thing is that if any of you are doing Agile or Scrum, you probably know that succeeding with one team Scrum or Agile is very difficult. Often people make adjustments and they change stuff from the framework because it's just too difficult or claimed not to work. And another sad truth fact is that most likely the organization that asks this question is too big in the first place. So you probably hear people saying, yeah, we could do that actually with 5 people. We don't need 3 teams for that. And sometimes it is actually in fact true. And the third sad truth bullet point that I have for you is that LeSS, or large-scale Scrum framework, is not going to help you with scaling your organization. So what does LeSS stand for? So what are we asking? What is the main question the LeSS framework suggests? So we suggest a different question. Instead of how to apply Agile in my big and complex organization, the LeSS framework deals a lot with organizational design. And basically what we ask is, how can we simplify the unnecessary big and complex organization design and be Agile rather than do Agile? And I think that is a main difference between LeSS and other approaches to scaling Agile. And LeSS is more about descaling the organization. So basically we are trying to simplify stuff. We are not trying to answer the, let's see, do we need another role for this, or do we need another meeting or another process for that? So we are looking for simplicity and agility over complexity and process. And in fact, another point that we believe in the LeSS community, we believe in learning organizations, which means there are no best practices. One of the basic errors I think we are often doing is we are talking about best practices. And in fact, in my opinion, there are no best practices. Best practices assume we have reached the ultimate solution. A best practice means we cannot improve anymore. So the LeSS framework and me personally, I believe in good practices within a context. Now, often the context changes, specifically in our domain, and the business context changes, which means the practices should also change, which means best practices, it's not something we like to talk about. And before we dive into the LeSS framework itself, I would like to share something from Craig Lerman. Craig Lerman is one of the co-creators of the LeSS framework, and he has this 4 laws of organizational behavior, which I really like. So I'm going to just read them as they are. Organizations are implicitly optimized to avoid changing the status quo of middle and first level managers and specialist positions and power structures. 2, as a corollary to 1, any change initiative will be reduced to redefining or overloading the new terminology to mean basically the same as status quo. So I'll stop here and give you an example. Scrum, the intention behind it, one of the basic building blocks of Scrum is self-organizing team. The Scrum Master is in no way a team leader. However, often I see organizations using the Scrum Master role to overload the actual team leader. Another example is Scrum by any means does not include the project manager role. So we will take the product owner role and just take the project manager and call him a product owner, and other examples. So this is one way of dealing with maintaining the status quo. 3, I'm continuing with the laws. As a corollary to 1, any change initiative will be called purist, theoretical, revolutionary, religion, and needing pragmatic customization for local concerns, which deflects from addressing weaknesses and manager/specialist status quo. So another form of dealing or pushing back the change that we see is saying this approach is nice and it may be very ideal, it may work for some organizations, but for us, not so much. We need some pragmatic customization. This is all for the agile freaks, but us, we are pragmatic people. We need customization, and these customizations often are just a way to deal or to avoid dealing with the difficult questions. And then 4, that's the interesting law that Craig suggests. He says, culture follows structure. So 1, 2, and 3 are basically talking about culture, right? So what Craig suggests is in order to be able to have an impact on culture, we really need to change the structure, to simplify the organization, to change it so it can be agile. Oops. Okay. So let's start talking about LeSS. So the LeSS framework is not new. I've known it since 2007, or even before that. I worked in a very big agile project, and in that project we had something like 1,000 people, and we really didn't know how to do Scrum or how to be agile at this scale. So what we did is we experimented. We started doing a lot of stuff that to some cases worked, in some other cases didn't make sense. I don't take credit for that, but I was a part of that, of those projects or parts of those projects. And those projects are actually documented in 2 books. The first one by Craig Lerman and Bas Vode is called Scaling Lean and Agile Development. The second one is called Practices for Scaling Lean and Agile Development. And they describe a set of 6,000 experiments with, of course, the explanation of why and how and why are they important and what's the mindset and the idea behind them. And those book exists, as I said, from 2008, so 8 years now, almost 9. And still, while they are, I think, on many of the Agile bookshelves, they were not considered as something that provides a solution to the scaling Agile problem, even though we thought that, you know, they kind of do. People disagreed and said, no, they don't provide a solution. It's just a bunch of experiments. So where do I start? And Bas and Craig, up to recently, actually tried to avoid even providing any kind of framework, because they said, you need to be a learning organization. So please go and start experimenting and find your place in this world and what should your process look like. But some other things happened and the context changed, and the practice that they chose, which is not to provide a framework, changed. And they decided that they want to provide a framework. And this framework is summarized in 3 pages, 3 A4 sheets of paper, not by-sided, just a very simple and not small font. It really is a very simple framework to provide the just enough thing that we need in order to apply those experiments to become a learning organization. And even most of it is not new. So I'll talk about this a bit later. Okay, this framework is called LeSS. This is what we're talking about. And with it, just a bit later came out the Certified LeSS Practitioner certification, which is basically a statement that you were trained by someone that the LeSS organization supports. I am not expecting this certification to be become any similar to other certifications. It's something mostly for you. So we don't provide any diplomas or something that you can print and put in a frame and show your family or stuff like that. So we have this framework. Now this framework, in order to explain it better, we have decided to share what are the principles behind the framework. So these are not like the Agile Manifesto principles. These are the guidelines that led the decisions behind the framework. So I will cover them later today, so you'll know what I mean. But they are like the heart of the framework. They are more important than the rules, are the actual principles. Still, there is kind of a big gap. According to many people, reading the framework, reading the principles, and the experiments, they're saying there's still a big gap. And unfortunately, we were probably thinking that organizations are in a more mature state than we thought. But this request for us to fill the gap is an indicator that there is something missing here. And this gap is something we call guides. And guides are not as, let's say, fluffy as experiments, which you can try and they may work and they may not work, but they are not as hard-coded as the framework, which we believe is very important to follow as like the cornerstone and the basic building blocks. Guides are stuff that we have seen that often work. We recommend to start out with some of them or try most of them, but not all of them, of course. These guides are documented in the recent book called Largescale Scrum. There is around 100 or so guides. So that's all of that introduction is to give you the context of LeSS. What is it about and how was it born? Now LeSS, while it has one name, it actually has 2 frameworks. We have the LeSS framework, which is for 2 up to 8 teams, and we have the LeSS Huge framework, which is meant to be used by organizations or product groups which are larger than 8 teams. Let's quickly cover it. So every product group, this is a less regular LeSS, let's call it this LeSS, so it has up to 8 teams. For this example, there are 3 for this diagram. It has 1 product owner and 1 product backlog. So first point to notice is we don't have, or we don't think there needs to be 1 product owner per team. We have 1 product owner and 1 product backlog for the entire shippable product. This product owner and teams will start an iteration, Scrum-like iteration, in a sprint planning meeting. This sprint planning meeting is divided just like in Scrum into 2 parts, sprint planning 1 and sprint planning 2. In sprint planning 1, the product owner and the teams will split the requirements or the backlog items between the different teams, so they will decide which team does what. One thing to notice, it's not necessarily team X does Y. It could be team X and team A does Y. So we are talking about identifying opportunities for collaboration and cross-team synchronization in the work. In sprint planning part 2, the sprint backlogs will be built. The sprint backlog, if you don't know, is the detailed plan for the upcoming sprint, or that's the name of the iteration in Scrum. Again, I'm maybe repeating stuff, but I'm not sure. Each day during the sprint will have a daily meeting, just like Scrum. It is not necessarily the synchronization or coordination tools between teams. So teams are free to choose whatever ways they see fit to communicate and coordinate the work. We usually recommend doing that as early as possible. There are some guides and experiments about that. At the end of every sprint, there will be a sprint review. Notice again, there will be 1 sprint review for the product, which means if we have up to 8 teams, it can have 1 sprint review with the entire product group. These are actually very energizing meetings, and there are again some guides and experiments on how to perform them and how to do them in an interesting manner. After the sprint review, each team will have their own retrospective. So retrospective is still held per team, but we have added one more thing. This is one of the, I think, most important addition to the LeSS framework, which is the overall retrospective. So we usually do not recommend to do it at the flow, like we have a sprint review and then a retrospective per team and then overall retrospective. That may be too much. So what we recommend is to do the overall retrospective at the beginning of the next iteration. And the overall retrospective is the meeting in which representatives from all teams and the Scrum Masters and the POs and stakeholders sit together and look not only at the, or not at all at the team level system, but they look in the entire system. Because one thing that we have learned, and we know that the LeSS framework is focusing on improving the bigger thing. It looks at the entire system. It's a whole product focus and not necessarily a single team thing. So sometimes a decision may be done at one team that may seem good for the team, but it actually creates a negative impact on the entire system. So this is something we want to identify. The overall retrospective is potentially an opportunity to do that and much, much more. And then people ask me, so, okay, before I explain what LeSS Huge is, how did you come up with 8? What's the thing with 8? Why 8 teams? Why not 6 teams? Why not 10 teams? So the explanation is actually kind of simple, and it's basic math. So Scrum Guide recommends that we have 3 to 4 items per sprint per team. if you didn't know that, and now you do. Which means that if we are trying to have the backlog in a good shape, we have it refined for, so give or take 2 sprints ahead. So this means for 8 teams, each team has around 12 items. So that's for total 100 backlog items. And now why 8? Because we think that the bottleneck is the single PO. And for a single PO, we believe, and from our experience, that 100 backlog items at any given moment is the maximum capacity that one PO can handle. So this is why we chose the number 8. It's not some arbitrary guessing game. And this is how less huge looks like. And you may find it very similar or to the previous diagram, because indeed it is. So you are seeing basically replicas of the LeSS framework with one change. The one change is the APO. You can see it at the left part of the system. The APO is an additional role that acts as a product owner towards this structure, this LeSS structure that we call a requirement area. So what we have done is we have taken every LeSS group, which is up to 18, and we have split it into requirement areas. How do we decide what composes a requirement area? I will discuss that shortly later when I present the principles, but basically we are looking for customer-centric requirement areas. So the APO is the person that represents the product owner towards this requirement area. Often, since it's still a product owner for 8 teams, he is a very experienced business person. He can make decisions. And those APOs, they work as a team in order to make sure that we get the right product. Now, we have the product owner still, and the product owner is what referred to often as potentially the head of this product. So if we have a very big product, or what sometimes people call portfolios, he may be the head, and the decisions that the product owner does is mainly about very high-level prioritization and about high-level budget allocation. So one of the things that the product owner can decide is that this requirement area is too big and this one needs to get more help, so let's allocate the budget and people differently and stuff like that. These decisions, of course, doesn't happen on a daily basis, but that's the role of the product owner, which is the main reason for the product owner being there. The product owner's role and responsibility is to help make sure that we are maximizing value and ROI from the product that we are building. So that is in a nutshell less huge. And to be honest, it's not very much complex. We are looking for simplicity, as I said. So one thing I wanted to share, I think it's important, is just quickly go over the 10 principles that led us to create the LeSS framework as is. So these are things that people and organizations that are using the LeSS framework can often reuse and as thinking tools. So as tools to understand why did we make this and that choice, and also as daily working tools. So let's start and see where this goes. No particular order. I'm just going to read them in the order that I usually do. So the first principle is large-scale Scrum is Scrum. So Scrum is a fairly simple framework. If you don't know it, you can read about it in the Scrum guide or Scrum primer. And large-scale Scrum assumes that in order to scale Scrum, you still need to stay Scrum, which means we do not add any extra roles or any extra processes almost. We try to avoid it whenever possible. We try to stick to basic Scrum as much as possible. So one PO is premise of Scrum. One product backlog is a part of Scrum, and we are loyal to those concepts for the sake of simplicity. Transparency. So we believe in transparency. I don't think there's anything important or new here, besides the fact that some decisions that we have made in the LeSS rules are actually in order to amplify transparency. So when you read it and you find something strange, you may think to yourself that, okay, if this increases transparency, that makes sense because it is aligned with the principle. Next principle is more with less. So we don't like the statement less is more, because less is not more. We are talking about achieving more with less. So less roles, less artifacts, less processes, less bottlenecks, less everything you may think of, and we believe that with less we can achieve more. Less hierarchy, less governance, and less other stuff. So that's the more with less principle, and you can read a lot about it in the book and in the website. Whole product focus. So we don't believe in anything that is being done not carrying the whole product in mind. So, for example, we will not call a team if it doesn't have a whole product focus. So, for example, in LeSS framework, if you have any sort of component teams, we would say very bluntly, this is not a LeSS implementation. As LeSS clearly defined in its rules, that all teams are real feature teams, cross-functional, self-organizing, that has a customer-centric and whole product focus to it. So it's very important. This is another reason why we have chosen to have one PO. We don't want the data and the priority decision being done by different people or creating conflict. So whole product focus. Next principle, customer-centric. So not only that we are whole product focused, we are very customer-centric. So if we have a requirement area, for example, it will be customer-centric in a sense that either it is engaged with a slice of the customers that we have, or it engages with a slice of customer functionality, but it's never a slice of the architecture. Same as for the team, same goes for the requirement area. So we are trying to be as customer-centric as possible. Another example in the LeSS framework for customer centricity is that we believe that the PO is actually not a customer proxy. He does not represent the customer, but is partly in charge of creating a relationship or enabling the relationship between the team and the customer itself. So the PO doesn't have to act as a mediator. This is about customer centricity. I'll go the other side now. So queuing theory. Queuing theory is a theory, it's a mathematical theory developed for the sake of telecom industry to focus is on flow and effectiveness of a system. We use queuing theory a lot. One example for the queuing theory that we have in LeSS is the one product backlog. So one of the basic statements of queuing theory is the less queues you have, the better. So we are looking to reduce the number of queues in the system. Also, we teach every LeSS student gets some basic training in queuing theory to be used as a tool for analyzing the system. So queuing theory, another basic principle. Empirical process control. So empirical process control, also a very known principle, something like the PDCA loop. We believe in empirical process control. We think that the organization needs to be a learning organization. In order to do that, empirical process control is critical, which means we measure stuff, we make experiments, we run them, and then we choose if to continue or not based on the actual results and not on some wishful thinking or stuff like that. So this also is visible in many elements in the LeSS framework. System thinking, I'm not going to go into system thinking too much because it's a very, let's say, deep topic, but if you want to read about it, you can do that at the LeSS site or read stuff from Peter Senge. There is this book called The Fifth Discipline, which is a great introduction to the topic. System thinking the premise of system thinking is mostly about looking at the system rather than the parts of the system. And there are some tools that we use in order to analyze. And for example, if we look at the whole product focused thing, then system thinking is a very important tool in order to be able to look at the whole product and whole system. One before last is the lean thinking. So lean thinking, again, not very new to people out there doing Agile. Lean has been a great influence on Agile, sometimes being interpreted wrongly. The LeSS framework tries to go back to the basics, the Toyota Lean, as we believe the intention is. And it's not only Kanban and reducing waste, it's a lot more. Just in a nutshell, the pillars of Lean are actually respect for people and continuous improvement, and not necessarily Kanban and waste elimination, even though those are important as well. The last principle is continuous improvement towards perfection. Because, and it's a very important one, often I get asked, do you have known or do you have a customer that does LeSS exactly as by the book, everything start to finish? And I say no. The LeSS framework is a perfection challenge. Just like Toyota is trying to have zero waste and one-piece flow as the ultimate solution and a WIP limit of 1, it probably will never be reached, but this is a goal we want to continuously aspire to be in. So it is very important to try and continuously improve, continuously be like LeSS. So I'm not familiar with any organization that was actually able to settle for the 3 roles that Scrum offers, which is team member, PO, and Scrum Master. Still, it's a very good place to be. If you are able to reach a state that in your organization, and I know it's a bit extreme, that in your organization, you can actually have a situation that you have only 3 roles and no hierarchy, then you're probably the perfect organization. It's probably never going to happen, but still it's a good place to aspire for, hence the continuous improvement towards perfection. And this is just one example. I think I basically covered what I intended to. I'm just going to do some shameless promotion. I have certified LeSS trainings in the coming few months. These are the list. The one that is nearest is in April in Riga, Latvia. I have one in May in Chicago, in June in Dublin, in July in Switzerland, and in August in Hamburg. If you're interested in any of those, you can contact me directly, or you could learn more at LeSS Work. There is trainings. You can look up Elad Sofer, or filter the list and see. And basically, that's all I had planned to share. I hope it was interesting and you learned something new. And now would be potential time for questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Elad, for that presentation. I'm just going to open my screen again and go through 1 or 2 more slides before we get to your Q&A session. So if you have questions for Elad and you haven't typed them yet, please do so now. We have plenty of webinars coming up over the coming months. Next month we have another one of our friends in Israel, Gil Zilberfeld, and he will be talking to you about test-driven development. And Michael Bolton is going to come along and talk a bit about test cases. In May and June, we've got other webinars looking at Agile leadership. We have maintaining quality in Agile. That's with Fran O'Hara, who was the winner of Best Tutorial at the EuroSTAR conference last year. And we also have a webinar on Java memory, getting rid of the garbage. So it's quite an interesting title there, and that's with Albert Whithaven. And all of these webinars are over on the Huddle website, so please head over and register for as many of those as you like. And the EuroSTAR program will be announced soon, but between now and then, which is the 19th of April, we have a promotion running where you can get 20% off any ticket type. So if you head on over to the EuroSTAR website, you can find out all about this great deal we have going. We have a brand new conference that's taking place in Oslo this coming May. It's called EuroSTAR. It's a one-day event, and all the information you need about this new event can be found at eurostarsoftwaretesting.com/EuroSTAR. Okay, so let's have a look at the questions here. And I just open this in front of me now. 1 second. The first question I have here mentions that Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland define Scrum roles, artifacts, events, and rules as immutable. Do they endorse LeSS?
So I would say no. They endorse something that Scrum.org is now promoting, which is called Nexus. It is another framework out there that supposedly supports scaling Scrum. So I would guess they endorse that one, even though I haven't asked them personally.
Is LeSS part of the Scrum Alliance?
No, LeSS is not a part of any alliance. LeSS is a part of the LeSS organization currently. That may change in the future. I'm not aware of any plans to do so. But I think some or potentially most of the LeSS trainers are in fact certified Scrum trainers.
And we have another question here. It says, many companies have software project managers. I'm not sure that this role is really needed. And what is your experience?
So my experience and personal opinion is, I don't want to say that a specific person is no longer needed anymore, because that would be A, disrespectful, B, someone may lose their job. So we do think that the role project manager, as many other roles, are actually redundant and wasteful and add complexity. However, one of the LeSS guides, when we talk about implementing LeSS or adopting LeSS, we are talking about, as an organization, provide job safety but not role safety. So I would like to believe that most of you in your organizations and most of other people in your organization, the majority are valuable people with a lot of knowledge and contribution. We do not recommend just getting rid of them. Some organizations have done that and actually declared that as a mistake. We do believe we want to help you simplify your organization. Hence, for example, project manager or integration manager or release manager or other roles like that, program manager, are basically covering the organizational dysfunctions. And we think that every organization should be aiming to get rid of those. I'm not saying immediately it's step one. However, we would be looking to get rid of those.
I think that appears to be all the questions that are coming through at the moment. And the person who asked that last question just responded there again, just agreeing with what you had just said. So that's good to know. I think we'll wrap it up at that. So, and we'd like to thank Elad today for taking the time out to talk to us about large-scale Scrum. And this webinar has been recorded, and the link will be shared with all you guys shortly. It will be sent out to you in roughly an hour's time. And in that link, you can find the resource page that will have the recording of this webinar as well as the slides. And so thank you all as well for coming along. Thank you to Elad. We hope to see you at future EuroSTAR and Huddle webinars. Thank you very much. Take care.